From time to time, we get a lot of similar questions, and of course, everybody's question is unique, but I just wanted to spend a little bit of time running them through you. And really, the first question that we see is, with Social Security, being a little unsure, pensions are starting to dry up. I know there's a lot of concerns with a lot of people's pensions to where maybe their benefits might change a little bit. What's a good way of creating a self-pension? Are there any other options that we have, Dustin?
20 plus years ago, I was just reading this the other day, 80% of companies used to provide pensions for employees. Well, now I would say it's just, the reverse of that. It's probably less than 20% of companies are actually providing pensions. And with, like you said, Social Security kind of being broken, they're making some changes and hopefully trying to save it, make some adjustments there. But pensions and building your self-pension now is going to become, if not already, the most important leg to the three-legged stool we hear about.
Yeah, I kind of think a lot of people are surprised to learn that they can kind of create their own pension. Like you mentioned, they're kind of going away. You still see them somewhat in the government sector, but in the private sector, they're just not as common as they once were. Very few people go to work for the same company anymore and stay there 40 years or 50 years and retire with a nice pension. But you can create your own pension. Most individuals will have a 401k plan or 403b plan, something of that nature, and as they move closer into retirement, they can actually transition that and use that as basically their own personalized pension plan. Sometimes you do that with annuities, sometimes you do that with some other alternatives or options, but you can still have a guaranteed income for life where it comes every single month, no matter what, just like the pension plan. So if your neighbor's got one and you're kind of jealous, well, maybe you can create one for yourself. What other questions?
Yeah, another question that I have, we get a lot of time in the office and we'll talk quite a bit about it, but with mutual funds, a lot of people will ask, are there any alternatives to mutual funds? And Matt, is there anything else that we can use instead of mutual funds?
Yeah, so, we mention all the time, we're not against mutual funds completely. There's certainly one of the options that individuals have available to them, but if you're getting closer into retirement, a mutual fund might not necessarily be the best option. So certainly there's all kinds of different alternatives. Obviously, it depends on your specific situation and what your goals and objectives are, your risk tolerance, things like that. But just off the top, I think some pretty common alternatives that we use all the time, first and foremost, would be an exchange-traded fund. And I know that sounds pretty similar to a mutual fund. The concept is similar, where it's a collection of stocks or bonds. But it has some advantages. One of the things we talk about mutual funds all the time is the fact that their fees can be a little bit high and excessive. They're not really efficient from a tax standpoint, and then you can't really do anything to protect the principal or preserve the principal like you can with an exchange-traded fund. So I kind of think that moving forward, it's going to take a while, but I think moving forward, there probably will be a day where exchange-traded funds are more popular than mutual funds. But right now, mutual funds obviously have such a huge head start, it's going to take a while to get there.
And on that topic, talking about mutual funds, and an advantage that ETFs have is this is a global economy now. With mutual funds, let's just say that something happens in Asia before our market opens, and we need to make adjustments immediately, just as soon as the market opens.
Right.
With a mutual fund, you're stuck.
Yeah. Well, because they're always bought and sold at 4 p.m.
That's
so
right.
That is a great point, Dustin. The exchange-traded funds, another reason why we like them is they're bought and sold all day long.
Yeah.
So like you're mentioning, if something crazy happens, some dictator does something,
Right.
or something that we can't predict happens that's going to negatively impact our markets, well, we can react.
Right.
Whereas with the mutual fund, you're really just stuck. What about you, Jordan? Is there anything else other than maybe an exchange-traded fund that you would suggest as an alternative?
Possibly. Maybe a stock could work. With stocks, though, we rise and fall as the stock rises and falls. I think with people who are soon to be retired or are already retired, a lot of stocks can be too speculative. Another alternative could maybe be some bonds. I know we'll talk sometimes about municipal bonds, maybe some corporate bonds, possibly treasury bonds. What's interesting, too, about the ETFs is there's not just stock ETFs. There's bond ETFs,
right.
And there's currency ETFs. And with ETFs, you can pretty much get any sector, any part of the economy. I was actually looking, there's 3D printing ETFs and coffee ETFs. So it's always interesting that they have the ability to do that as well.
Well, I think probably if we try and think about some of the last alternatives to mutual funds, obviously the bank has some products, right? So CDs, money market accounts, things like that. But obviously today where interest rates are, they're just not paying anything. So probably the only other thing that we haven't mentioned would maybe be some of the different annuities. So you have the fixed annuities, which aren't paying very much right now either. You have the variable annuities, which you have to watch out for their fee structure.
Basically, a mutual fund, just at a little higher fee.
Just a higher fee mutual fund, yeah. You have the index annuity that can sometimes be appropriate. You have immediate annuities that can sometimes work. So there are a lot of alternatives. And you know, I'm glad that we got that question that you asked it, Jordan, because I think there's a lot of advisors out there that, you know, again, they act as if mutual funds are the only option that's available. And it's one of the options, but it's not the only option. And really, if that's all that somebody has in their portfolio and they're within 10 years of retirement, that they've got to go out and get a second opinion and talk with somebody about that.
Well, if you have any more questions for us, or if you want to send in your questions, we'd be happy to talk about them on the show. Thanks.
While you're accumulating and you're on your way up the mountain, what happens is you're taking a lot of risk, you're watching it all the time, and when market volatility happens, you don't get excited about it, but it doesn't really matter. And you know, retirement planning, it can be very, very complex and difficult to understand, but it doesn't have to be. You know, oftentimes we'll talk about the analogy of people climbing Mount Everest, and that being a lot like retirement planning. And what I mean by that is that climbing Mount Everest, there's been over 250 people that have died climbing Mount Everest. But the interesting thing about that is that 200 of that 250 died on the way down. That means that only 50 of them died on the way up. And the reason that is what happens when individuals get up to the top of Mount Everest. Well, guess what? They feel like they've made it. Now they kind of drop their guard. They're not as worried anymore. Now they're on the way down. They think, hey, I've made it. This is easy now. Well, it's the same thing when it comes to retirement planning. While you're accumulating and you're on your way up the mountain, what happens is you're taking a lot of risk, you're watching it all the time, and when market volatility happens, you don't get excited about it, but it doesn't really matter. And then what happens is when you get up here to the top, you think, well, hey, I've made it. I'm at retirement now. Now, all I need to do is I just need to turn the income on my 401k or 403b or whatever type of account that you have. Now I just need to start taking income out of that account, and I'll be able to make it down the hill with no problem. Well, that's just absolutely false. That's not the case. What happens once you get to the top? Now, this is when the real work starts. This is when you need to be working with someone that specializes in just retirement planning. It's a totally different set of tools and skills that are involved with setting up a plan to get you down the retirement mountain safely and make it to the end of your life without running out of money. And you know, I've got a list of things here that I want you to kind of think about if you're retired or getting ready to retire. There's 4 tips here to really structure and simplify your retirement plan. Number 1 is to focus on the big picture. And what I mean by that is you need to develop and start to implement some goals and an actual roadmap to what your perfect retirement plan is going to look like. So do you know when you're going to retire, and do you know what type of retirement you want to have ideally? Do you know what type of income you're going to need and how to best set up your investment so that when we do see a little bit of market volatility, that it doesn't take you off of retirement, send you back to work? So what you want to do is make sure you focus on the big picture and set your goals and understand what that means to you. Number 2 is you want to consolidate your accounts. You want to simplify what's going on. You know, I see a lot of times, I'll see individuals where they have a 401k and they'll have a 403b from a previous employer. They'll have an IRA account that they had at a previous employer that they rolled over to the bank. They may have a thrift savings plan, and they have several different accounts, and they think, you know what, I've got all these accounts over here. I'm well diversified. But what we find out is you may have a lot of different accounts, but you have no real diversification. And what I mean by that is what you want is if you have several different positions in your portfolio, you want them all working together. So you want the right side to complement the left side. And if we have a lot of things scattered out, then that's exactly what it is it's scattered out. It's not necessarily diversified, and there's not necessarily a synergy going on there. So what you want to do is you want to consolidate these accounts over into maybe one or two different accounts that you would have so that you can understand what's going on exactly and then be able to make the adjustments and the changes in order to hit your goals and to try and reduce the amount of risk that's there. Number three is you want to have broad diversification. So although you may have thought you had broad diversification here with the several different accounts, once you've consolidated, now what you can do is you can really start using some tools that are going to give you safety. You're going to want some investments that are liquid because there's three different worlds that are always competing for your dollar. And what you want to do is you want to use all three of those. So the banking world, that's where you want some liquidity. You may have a savings and a checking account or maybe a money market account. Then number two is you want something that's going to start producing some income, some accounts where you're going to see that money coming in every month. And then you're going to want to also have some money in the Wall Street world. This is where you can take some risk. You can go after the higher returns because you have a good safety net in place. And then number four here is you want to automate your income payments every month. So what that means is you may see someone or know someone that has a pension or they're getting money deposited into their account each month. Well, you can do the same thing for yourself as well. You can set up your own pension that's self-funded. So what that can do is actually automate to where money's being deposited into your account each month so that you can start to pay bills and do whatever it is that you'd like to do in retirement. You also want to automate your expenses. So this could be an account that you know you're going to pay the same amount each month. Well, set it up so that it's automated so you don't have to worry about that every month. So if you have any questions about the 4 tips to really simplify your retirement plan, please feel free to call our office or you can visit us on our website. Once you get into retirement or if you're close to retirement, now it's no longer about the big ups and the big downs in your portfolio. It's about getting consistent returns. You don't want a whole lot of excitement either way. I want to talk a little bit today about the importance of consistency in your portfolio. And once you get into retirement or if you're close to retirement, now it's no longer about the big ups and the big downs in your portfolio. It's about getting consistent returns. You don't want a whole lot of excitement either way. So I want to take, for example, I've got a portfolio here that it's a $2 million portfolio. And what we're going to do is we're going to compare 2 accounts that both average the same but have very, very different results. So let's just say, for example, that we take our $2 million portfolio and we put $1 million of that into, for example, let's say Facebook stock. Okay, and then on the other $1 million, what we're going to do is we're going to put it into a balanced portfolio. And what this portfolio is designed to do is it may not gain as much as the market in the big years, but also we're not going to lose as much as the market does in the down years. We just want to have some consistency in there. So we start with the same $1 million in each portfolio. And in the Facebook portfolio, let's say that the market goes up the first year by 60%. So now we've turned that $1 million into $1.6 million. Okay, that's a pretty excited person, I would say, that has that portfolio to gain 60% in a year. And now let's say in the other portfolio, in the balanced portfolio, that it goes up 30% that same year. So while Facebook was up 60, this portfolio here was only up 30%. So this original $1 million is now worth 1.3. Well, if those two people, if that was 2 different people and they saw each other at a party or something, the 60% portfolio, he'd be on fire. He would be very excited, I'd say, and the other person's not so excited now that they're seeing somebody else made much more than them. But now let's fast forward to the second year. With the Facebook portfolio, it lost significantly again. So now it's down 40%. So we lose $640,000. So we were up to 1.6. Now we've taken a 40% loss. So now we're back down to $960,000. So if we look at that, so it averaged, it's up 60, then down 40. It averaged 10% over those 2 years. Now let's look at the other portfolio. So we were at 1.3 million after the 30% gain. This one goes down only 10%. So it did fall a little bit, but it was in a safer position. It's not going to be as drastic as the, let's say, Facebook stock. So now this 1.3 million lost $130,000. So now this original $1 million is now worth $1.17 million. It too averaged the same as the Facebook, so they both averaged 10%, but we have much, much different results. So we always want to really focus on getting consistent returns. We don't need a whole lot of huge gains as long as we never experience any of these huge losses. So this is just an example of how consistency really pays off over time. If you have any questions about how to make sure your portfolio is set up in a way that you're not experiencing these big losses when the market is going through the volatile years, please feel free to call our office and/or visit our website.
So over time, there were multiple occurrences of banking crises. Now, these were more of a function of fearing that the banks were going to fail. In 1914, though, the Federal Reserve System was created by an act of Congress. Welcome to another segment of Strategic Wealth University. Today, we're going to be looking at one of the most interesting parts of our economy, the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is an intricate and vital part of our economy's health, and while it plays such an important part in our economy's health, it is a forgotten and often misunderstood area of our economy's functioning. So our economy operates with a central banking system. Now, what do I mean by a central bank? A central bank is a type of government bank that regulates currency or money. So first, let's go ahead and start from the beginning with the history of the Federal Reserve. So back in 1819 in Boston, Massachusetts, there was a bank, the Suffolk Bank. It was a private bank that required that all of the banks in New England were to keep a deposit with them. This lasted about until 1860. So over time, there were multiple occurrences of banking crises. Now, these were more of a function of fearing that the banks were going to fail. In 1914, though, the Federal Reserve System was created by an act of Congress. The Federal Reserve System was created during Woodrow Wilson's presidency, and he stated that this was his top accomplishment while in office. So the Federal Reserve, or the act of government, created 12 different banks that were and are spread out throughout the economy. So what's interesting about this is that we have 12 different banks with a Federal Reserve System. So the Federal Reserve headquarters is located in Washington, D.C., and it's overseen by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. Louisville, Kentucky, where Strategic Wealth Designers is headquartered, is in the St. Louis region of the Federal Reserve. And Louisville is one of the 3 cities in this particular region to have a Federal Reserve branch office. So if you pull out a dollar bill in your pocket, you can find out where your money comes from. So where on the dollar bill is this? On the left-hand side of a $1 bill, for those in the St. Louis region, there's a letter H. This is the 8th letter of the alphabet. If you were to look at the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, your dollar bill would actually appear on it. So depending on whom you speak with, the Federal Reserve System has had, in the last few decades, a paradigm shift, if you will. The Federal Reserve services really 3 main groups. These are the bankers, the United States Treasury, and of course the general public. So the Federal Reserve provides services to banks by loaning or lending them money. This is the federal funds rate. Now, the federal funds rate can be defined as the rate that banks charge each other for overnight loans. The Federal Reserve System can also distribute cash and coin to banks. They can help process electronic payments. And then for the U.S. Treasury, the Federal Reserve processes checks, maintains accounts, and also will lead government securities auctions. And then this all really ties into how it services the public. So all these actions circle around to the consumer or the individual. Now, our economy is a group of consumers, and the Federal Reserve functions to service the economy that we have created. To simply put it, the Federal Reserve has a responsibility to make sure our economy is healthy. So really, how do they do this? So on one side, it's the responsibility to make sure that there is maximum employment in the workplace. On the other side, it's the responsibility to make sure that there is price stability. So this is really a balancing act. The Federal Reserve has set a goal for there to be, in the long run, about a 2% rate of inflation. So inflation is defined as the increase in the level of prices of goods and services. The Federal Reserve is one of the most important and most interesting parts of our economies. So really, if you would like to learn more about the details of how the Federal Reserve really operates, please feel free to give us a call or check us out on the website.